Thanks. Yeah,
We
now
go.
we can start.
All right.
Hi, it's good evening today. So I will be the first. My name is Vasyl from Kiev, Ukraine. As I will first, this will be like an easy question, I guess.
All right.
Yeah, just to warm up. Let's talk about AI.
Okay.
A little bit. So given that AI already gains more and more momentum, I've heard, for example, that it's already can analyze the code or even generate it by its own. I think there are some kind of new possibilities arise here. And also it looks like the role of the programmers and also the testers may change drastically, or even testers even can become obsolete. So in your opinion, what will the future for software testers look like? I mean, so for example, can we go to like, so we will not be the software testers, and instead we could be like AI learning data set testers. Yeah, and also like regarding the AI also, maybe you have some examples of how testers may apply AI to their work today. For example, to generate, some kind of interesting test data, or do some impact analysis, risk analysis, something like that. That's my question. Thank you.
Okay. What's the difference between AI and reasonably sophisticated software? What's the difference?
I think if we talk AI, we talk about the we cannot predict the so we can give some input and cannot predict the output. It's like not clear what exact like path or procedure code takes. And also I don't know, I think it's like a Turing test or something. So that's the difference. If you talk about real AI, it will pass the Turing test.
Well, that's right. And if we talk about flying cars, they will we'll be able to drive over all the traffic. But we don't have flying cars. We don't have anything close to flying cars. Do we have self-driving cars? We have self-driving cars in the sense that, well, yeah, we have self-driving cars in the same sense that we have, first of all, we've had self-driving cars for years and years and years, forever. We call them taxis and trains and buses. Because, so far as I'm concerned, as a passenger in those things, a vehicle is driving itself. All of what you've heard about AI, Vasyl, is marketing. All of what you've heard about it is marketing. And if you've read about it, you will have read about algorithms. You have read about basic principles from machine learning. You'll have learned about Bayesian approaches, and you'll have learned about gradient descent, and you'll have learned about algorithms wherein the machine itself figures out an answer to an algorithmic problem. Including, for example, rather interesting things like, can the machine spot a pattern in code that is apparently intended to do something or other? It's trained, of course, by a human and corrected by a human to say that this bit of code looks like something that we've seen lots before that addresses this kind of issue. But what you've not read about, probably, and what very few people seem to have read about, is the idea of looking at AI from a skeptical point of view. There's a lot of enthusiasm about AI. There's a lot of excitement about AI because we can see AI doing things that a little kid could do, right? Ask a little kid a question. The little kid will occasionally get the answer right. The difference between the little kid and the AI is that the little kid has social concerns built into it, social awareness built into it, and that social awareness develops. That is, the little kid is a member of society. The little kid has a human body. The little kid has grown-ups that he or she wants to please. And we are, as human beings, intrinsically motivated to do that sort of stuff. But AI is not. AI has no social awareness whatsoever. My dog came up for a visit just now, and I could take a picture of my dog. I believe the fellow's name was Marcus Kraft, where I came with, this metaphor comes to me from him. I could take a picture of that dog, and the AI would be able to detect a pattern of pixels in that picture where it classifies it as a dog. But the AI will never see the dog bark or hear the dog bark. The AI will never recognize the dog's tail's wagging. The AI will never want to train the dog. The AI will never realize that the dog needs feeding. Certainly not in our current state. So everybody should just calm the hell down about AI, because it is nowhere at the moment. We've got there was there was a competition a few years ago where a bunch of researchers excitedly declared that this chatbot, Eugene Goostman, had successfully fooled some humans into believing that it was a real person. This is a Turing test. I'm convinced that that AI will not have spent, or would not have lasted 20 seconds with a reasonably smart tester. What that experiment proved, that there's some people who are dumber than AI. I will stand by that statement. And there's an easy way to prove it at the moment. There's an easy way to prove it, and that is to ask Eugene Goostman a question like this. This comes from Ernest Davis, who is a researcher in AI. Ernest Davis gives AIs questions like this. George has spilled a little bit of poison into his milk. If George is very careful not to drink any of the poison, can he still drink the milk? The AI has no idea of how to answer that, because the AI doesn't know what it is to live in the world. Now, what a nice idea that a machine, what you said earlier, Vasyl, is very important here. You said you can't predict what the outcome is going to be when you feed something into AI. You can't predict what the outcome is going to be. And that's because what essentially happens is we throw a lot of spaghetti at the wall when we're doing machine learning. And we look at the spaghetti that sticks to the wall and we say, that spaghetti is done. But what about all the spaghetti that's not done? And how can we trust that particular model that comes out of the training we give it? How can we trust it to answer a new question? By throwing more spaghetti against the wall. But that model won't know the difference between spaghetti and string. It won't know the difference between spaghetti and that stuff that you get out of a can, the stuff they get to kids sometimes, silly string they called it. It won't know the difference between that and a fishing line. It won't know the difference until a human comes along and corrects it. So here's the thing. Would you trust a machine to write some code and then run that code without predicting what the outcome of that code would be. Would you do that?
Yeah, at first glance, of course not. But if you think more about it, you already use lots of code in your daily life, like without knowing who write this code and how stupid this person was.
Yes, exactly.
Basically the same.
And look at how much fun that is.
So if we talk,
if anybody were paying attention, they would notice that through their day, they run through hundreds of bugs. Fortunately, most of them are in systems that just don't matter very much. Most of those bugs are in things that don't matter. But my concern as a tester and my concern as a humanist is in the things that do matter. That's what I worry about. Here's an example, just a little example. This comes from my iPhone. Where is it? Oh, I thought I took the picture. Oh yeah, here it is, right here. The other day I exported a bunch of pictures from my iPhone to my Windows computer. Okay, I don't know if you can read this. I'll put it up really close. And what does this say? Right, there's a little picture of my daughter there. And what does the top line say? This is what my Photos app now tells me.
It's problem because your camera cannot autofocus on the near object.
There's an algorithm that handles the autofocus. Let's see if we can get it. Let's see if we can get it. Can you see the top line there?
From my
Mac.
Mac. Mac, sorry.
From my Mac. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't own a Mac. Right? There's an algorithm that they put in there that just says, well, if it's from your regular machine, then it's since we're from Apple, it's a Mac. Well, come on. That's a silly little bug. The bugs I'm worried about are when we have not a few self-driving cars on sunny streets in the summertime in Phoenix. My concern is what happens when we have a lot of self-driving cars on the streets of Kyiv in January, where there's snow on the ground and where there are, well, I don't want to be nasty about it because the same is true everywhere, but where there are actual Ukrainian drivers driving around. Imagine, please, a self-driving car in Bangalore, in India. And what's it going to be like? What all of the AI bros fail to realize, fail to consider, is that we are in a social world. And the social world and the human world is a world in which you can't render it into algorithms. And we don't know how to render that into algorithms. We don't know how to give machines social agency. The machine can't understand our intention. But amazingly, this is the amazing thing about humans, is that we can sort out each other's intentions. We can figure out each other's intentions. We don't know how to do that with AI. And so when GPT-3 cleverly produces something that looks like a sensible sentence, which it gathers from millions and millions and millions of pieces of data, it doesn't know what it's talking about. It doesn't know what it's talking about. So we can program a machine to say stuff, and we can choose the stuff that says, hey, that actually looks sort of kind of reasonable, like a human would. We can't predict what's going to happen the next time. What's the, it showed up on Twitter last night. There's this a project being run right now. I forget what it's called, but people are throwing sentences at it, questions at it. And it's deciding whether or not something is socially competent or not. And it's getting it wrong all the time. It's no better than chance. So everybody should just calm the hell down And remember this, AI guarantees that we will need skilled testers. Absolutely guarantees that we will need skilled testers, because we will need skilled critics. We will need people who look at this stuff and say, and look at it critically for a problem. Because machinery can't tell the difference between problem and no problem. Machinery has what this is Harry Collins's term, a locus of interpretation. Humans are the locus of interpretation. We get to decide what we like and what we don't like. And to give that responsibility to a machine is fundamentally irresponsible. At the end, it's always a human making a decision whether this is a right judgment or not, or it's a human abdicating that decision.
So it looks like the same thing with automation. Like, so there will be less software testers, but if you are skilled and smart, you will be good.
I don't know if there will be fewer software testers or not, but I think there should be more software testers than more skilled software testers than there are. Right now, we've got a problem, and it's hard to say this without sounding without sounding unpleasant, but most of the testers who are working today, in my observation and experience, and I'm really sorry to say this, but most of them aren't doing very good work. And we could do good work with a lot fewer of them. The reason they're not doing very good work is not on them. It's on a whole system, a kind of conspiracy amongst managers and tool vendors and testers and certain organizations that perform testing certifications. There's a conspiracy amongst all those people. And by that, I mean, nobody is intending ill. People have sort of kind of good intentions. But managers aren't demanding good work from testers. And the reason for that is managers don't know what good testing work looks like. And there's a part of the conspiracy in all of that is that a lot of managers don't really want good testing work, because it would mean they'd have to slow down. They'd have to drive prudently, right? So fortunately, unlike with cars, I mean, there's a lot of bad drivers on the road, but other drivers help to sort that out to some degree. With testing, you can get by for a long time not doing very good work. And it pains me to say that, because it means that I'm suggesting that most testers aren't very good at what they do, but it's true, most testers aren't very good at what they do. You know, when you look at the statistics, when you look at just a basic idea, most salespeople aren't very good at what they do. They're in the bottom half. Or half of all salesmen are in the bottom half of all salesmen. All salespeople, you know, there's some salespeople who are fabulous. They're in the top 10%. They're really good salespeople. There's a bottom 10% too. So you can get away for a long time without doing really great work as a tester, because what managers are looking for is they're looking for confirmation. They're looking for a demonstration that the product can work, and that's possible to do. You can always run a so-called test that says, "Oh, look, I do this and do this and do this and do this and do this, and I get that," just like it says in the script. But that's not testing. Testing is, what happens if I vary this little thing in some way? What happens if I produce inappropriate, or if I provide inappropriate input instead of appropriate input? What happens if I do these things out of order? What happens if I try to use this product in a way that the designer didn't anticipate? What can I learn from trying to use this? That's testing. But most managers, it seems to me, are content with testers who essentially follow a script don't find too many bugs. Yeah, says Eugenio is saying some managers, test cases equals pass. That's testing. That's not testing. To test something is to challenge it. To test something is to learn about it. To test something is to experience it and explore it and experiment with it. And to take it back to the beginning of the question, that's where I'll wind up. AI does not experience software as a human does. Therefore, it doesn't know how to write software and it doesn't know how to test software. And everybody should just calm the hell down.
Thank you, Michael. It was like a, yeah, sorry.
There's one more thing. Sorry, I forgot one more thing. The other day, I wrote a blog post based on my experience with a piece of software that a couple of years ago said, hey, it can do everything that a regular software tester can do. You know what it can't do? It can't test itself. Or if it was tested by regular testers or by an actual tester, it was tested by a completely incompetent tester. And that product is Mabel. And rest assured, at Mabl, you can read about it on my blog, developsense.com. And you can rest assured that Mabel is not the last product I'm going to test in this way. And it's certainly not the last product that I'm going to look at and find that it is completely incapably tested. There were so many bugs when I started testing Mabel so quickly. I found so many bugs so quickly that I was overwhelmed at trying to keep track of them all. And that's marketing. That's what happens when managers hear the marketing say, oh, I can get rid of some testers. This is a product that has not been tested by competent testers. And it's being touted as something that, oh, you can put this into your build pipeline. I mean, I have no idea what kind of problems I would find when I put it into the build pipeline, but I bet it wouldn't be pleasant. So let me put up the link to that. I think I've got a link.
I guess sorry, I guess I already put the link because like at first try I found this healthcare company called Mabel.
Yeah,
looks with E in the end, and I was scared. But then, okay, pipelines, okay, people will not suffer from it. So anyway, thank you very much, Michael. I guess I take so much time from you, and I guess all the other folks also waiting. So thank you for your answer, and there are a lot to think about.
Okay, read some of the books too. Read Artificial Unintelligence by Meredith Broussard. Read Artifictional Intelligence by Harry Collins. I'm looking at a new book. It's so new, it's not even on my computer yet, but it is on my iPad. It's a book by Melanie Mitchell, who's been studying AI for a long time. It's called Artificial Intelligence, A Guide for Thinking Humans. Have a look at Automating Inequality by, I believe that's by Virginia Eubanks. All kinds of books that look at AI from a skeptical point of view and ignore the marketing. The marketing is, quite frankly, bullshit. Okay, next question on that cheery note.
Hello, Michael.
Hi.
It's my turn. My name is Ekaterina Abzyatova. I'm a QA engineer in Cyclum company and work in software testing a little bit more than 10 years. Work with mobile, desktop, web applications. And I have an actual question for me about learning and education. So since we live in a very rapidly changed world, we have a lot of information, a lot of like new changes, new technology, new updates in operation systems. I don't know, so a lot of new type of devices. And also we have a lot of literature, a lot of articles, conferences, books and other, but we have a very limited time for education in our life. So, and I'm wondering, so how you choose, maybe do you have your own learning strategy, how to keep your knowledge like up to date, and how you choose this information. Maybe have some rules because we have like too much information around us, but for continued learning, we need to select like the most important and relevant information for us.
That is a wonderful and very challenging question. It's a very difficult question to answer because of exactly the premises that you base it on. We are awash in information these days. So I don't know how to give a good answer for you, but I can tell you a little bit of what I have done through my career. One thing that really helps is get old. Because the more years you've had learning stuff, the more opportunity you have. Now, that doesn't mean that I've learned many things very well, but it means I've learned a few things. So the first thing is try getting older, and then you'll seem a lot more clever than the younger people. Although the younger people won't recognize that. That's one. So, the first thing I would suggest is follow your heart, follow your interests, follow your passions, and for any given subject, especially in the technology field, this harkens back to my answer about AI. It's a really good idea to follow the people who are critics of a particular discipline. That has worked pretty well for me, because people who are really good critics of a discipline, really good critics, acknowledge the value of good work, and they carefully point to bad work in that field, in that discipline. Avoid people who are breathlessly excited about something, right? And you do that by surveying the field, whatever that field is, and trying to look for people who are admiring but skeptical of it. That's one thing. Another thing that has helped me is to take whatever I'm reading or whatever I'm studying and feed it back into generalizing about other things that I'm reading about. For instance, when I read about engineering, a lot of what is important in engineering is about errors, right? About how engineers make mistakes. There's a fellow named Charles Perrow, whose work I've hovered around, but I don't think I've read any of his books explicitly yet, but I've read a lot of people who refer to him. So I'm really eager to move on to his stuff next. A good start into that sometimes is to look at pop science books that steer you into the actual science. So as you're reading something, take notes on the part of it that interests you, and notice where the author's footnotes are guiding you to their source material. And it's a wonderful thing about the way books have evolved over the years. It used to be books were just massive walls of text. Now, most of the books I'm reading these days, it's interesting because you can see it in the ebook pretty easily. I get to the 60% mark in the book, and I notice, wait, I'm done the book. What's all the rest of this stuff? And it turns out that it's bibliography and notes. So when you read the source material in the notes and the source material in the bibliography, then that's your opportunity to go deep. So another heuristic, another way of working your way through this is to go wide and then go deep, and back out and go wide again and go deep again, and create yourself a sort of web of associations between those things. So for example, when I was mentioning errors in engineering, well, I can take that and transport it almost immediately into software, right? Into software testing, because software testing is very much about errors. But what else is software testing about? Software testing is about sociology. It's about how people act in groups and how people obtain their knowledge from other people in a group. So a few years ago, I was listening to a radio show called How to Think About Science, and that turned me on to a guy named Simon Schaffer, who very kindly agreed to meet me for a beer in London in 2011 or 2012, and that's how I got familiar. He recommended to me the work of Harry Collins, who is a sociologist of science, and Harry's work has been profoundly influential on James Bach and on me. And the things that Harry is interested in are things that I've now become interested in. Because one of the things that Harry talked about, Harry's a very broad thinker. He talked about how software is being used in sports to judge tennis games and so on. I also read the newspaper. I have a strong community of people that I interact with, and all these are contributors to things that help me sort and filter out who I should pay attention to. So much of it is recommendations from other people and from other sources. And then you're lucky in a certain kind of sense, because you have a kind of work, since you're working as a tester in a regular job, you have a kind of work that focuses you on a particular set of tasks and technologies and so on. And therefore you have the opportunity, and you work with these things every day, you have the opportunity to feed your experience back into your agenda, into your syllabus. I don't have that to the same degree that working testers do. I don't go that deep on a lot of things because I'm moving around all the time. So hang out with people who are specialists, and then hang out with people who are generalists as well. That's another way of helping to sort out what your agenda is. But you know, follow your interests, follow your heart, follow your passions.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's very interesting. But do you have maybe your own list of I don't know, maybe specialist or some conferences just to go wide, as you said, for example, to familiar with everything? Maybe you can share also.
I haven't been to any conferences this year. The same general pattern works. I get the first, let's see what happened. Kem Kainer came to my company back in 1997, and he taught a bunch of us. I was a program manager at the time, but the test manager knew that I'd be really interested in this fellow because I'd read his book. So Kem suggested to me that I go to the Quality Week conference because he thought I should meet this guy, James Bach. And James said, oh man, when I met James, we started talking to each other and interacting with each other. And James said, you know, Jerry Weinberg has this thing going on at his, it's called the Amplifying Your Effectiveness Conference. You should go to that. So I went to that. So go to people you trust and get recommendations for things that are really interesting to them. For many years, I've been going to the Eurostar conferences. In fact, I think this was my 15th year in a row. But I've been lucky enough to be invited to talk there. And at every conference, put it this way, I can't tell you which conferences to go to specifically. But what I can tell you is at the conference, again, follow your interests and don't worry about going to all the talks. Meet with people who will recommend particular talks to you. Meet with it, pay attention to what happens in the hallways and at the dinner table and at the lunch buffet and so on. And those people will steer you, and you'll find that maybe you'll go to a session and you'll say, oh my God, that was terrible. Or maybe you'll go to a session and say, oh my goodness, that was wonderful. And then now you've got another network. But knowledge like that is developed socially. So my advice would be pick one. Eurostar for me has been pretty good, but I spend most of my time there chatting with people and going to the test lab. The QA Fest people in Kyiv a few years ago ran a terrific conference. So you've got that available to you. I think it was called QA Fest, am I right?
Heard about this, looks like yes.
Oh, and Eugenio has very helpfully put up into the chat a list. That's handy. And basically talk around, ask people if they've been to a particular conference, if they like it. Some people like conferences that are particularly friendly. Some people like conferences that are particularly challenging. What we don't have, what we used to have more challenging conferences. For example, I remember, what was it called? Let's Test. A conference run by a bunch of very energetic Swedish people. And that was a terrific conference because it went on 24 hours for the better part of a week. It was done towards the end of spring in Stockholm. And so people would talk about testing until it got dark, which would be about 12:30 in the morning. And then as soon as it got light again, they'd be talking about testing as well. That would be about 1:30 in the morning. And in between, they were also talking about testing. The thing never shut down. The test lab was open 24 hours. Rob Sabarin, who is somebody whose work I think would be worth looking at, but Rob doesn't publish as much as I wish he did. Rob had a talk that began at 2 o'clock in the morning at that conference. It was crazy. But it was deeply immersive. It was held at a conference center outside of town. So anyway, that's a long rambling answer, but follow this social network, your own social network. And I'm not talking about electronic ones. I'm talking about real interconnections with people, and then follow people off the authors and off the scholars that you like in writing. Read at least 2 different newspapers each day. That helps. Magazines can be good too. And once you start that stuff, you'll find yourself hopping from place to place to place. It allows you to afford your examining your interests.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you.
Hello, I think I'll go for next. So my name is Yulia Vakal. I'm a test lead at Polkat company based in Bristol, the United Kingdom. And today I would like to ask you a more specific, maybe practical question than you had so far. But I believe it still could be useful for the community. So how to build the communication between 2 testing teams within a company to achieve the most effective and efficient collaboration. So let's say you have a team of automation testers and a team of backend testers, and you don't have a test manager in the company. So maybe you have some practical tips how to build these day-to-day activities to get the best of this communication collaboration.
First step, and I've got to say this, it's so important to me. First step is stop thinking about automation testers and start thinking about testers. Stop thinking about manual testers and start thinking about testers. Testing is neither automated nor manual. But what you mentioned is an interesting thing. Some testers are coders. Some testers are not coders.
Yep.
But there's a problem in our business, and that is that everybody believes, or not everybody, but a sufficiently large number of people to be very annoying believe that it is the purpose of software tools to press virtual buttons on our machinery and then look up the results, a process that we refer to in rapid software testing as automated checking. And there's some usefulness to that. But here's, it seems to me, a really good way to establish interaction between those groups. If you are not a coder, but you do know there are coders in your organization, ask the coders for some help in writing code that helps you get something useful done. In other words, ask people for a favor. When you ask somebody for a favor, you're doing a couple of things. First of all, you are giving a nod, giving some honor to their expertise. That's a kind of cool thing. You're honoring them that way, and people respond really well to that. When you ask them for help, it's funny because, oh, I don't want to ask them for help, they're busy. Nah, good people love being asked for help. Good people have a mentality to provide service to other people, to help other people. The second thing you're doing when you do that is you're implicitly giving them an invitation to ask you for help too. And so I think a really wonderful way to establish communication between separate testers in a group is to set out a policy, a commitment in yourself that you will ask for help and that you will offer help. Because somebody over there in that other group has a problem that they need to solve. And you can offer help with that if you become aware of it. But you're not as likely to become aware of it unless you're asking for help yourself and setting up that invitation. Does anybody know how to solve this problem? Can anybody provide me with help in this particular problem? That's a really good way to get things started. Now, Yulia, these in this organization, are these people in the same physical place, roughly speaking, same building or the same city?
Well, let's say same country.
Same country, okay. So, but it's UK,
but
right?
basically remotely. Most of the time they're working remote.
They're remote. Okay, I think remote work to a significant degree is a disaster. And I can tell you this because I work remote all the time. And socially, remote work is absolutely terrible because it doesn't provide the opportunity for spontaneous interaction, and it doesn't provide the opportunity for us to eat together, to go out for a coffee together, to go out for a drink together. And to the degree that that happens online at all, which it almost never does, it's awful. We can't see each other's body language very well. We can't feel the chill in the room when somebody says something slightly inappropriate. We can't laugh together in the same kind of way. You know, the laugh sounds like this horrible honking that's coming from the speaker. We can't notice nuances. We're not in a shared space. And everybody right now is very excited about working from home because they're looking at all the they're looking at the fact that it's possible in a kind of way. But I think it is, at least for the extroverts, it's terrible. My best experiences in this weird career that I've got, they don't happen in a half-hour Zoom meeting. They happen over the course of a meetup at a pub. They happen over the course of lunch in between some work that we're doing in the morning and work we're doing in the afternoon. The best experiences I have are sitting next to other people as they do that work. Now, there's certain kinds of things you can get away with online. One of them is paired testing. James Bach and I become quite fluid with that. We can do that reasonably well. But it's really hard to bring a third person into that. But in a live setting, it's a little bit easier for three people to sit around in the machine. So there's another idea, which is propose paired testing sessions between people who are specialists in one aspect of testing, in one aspect of the product, and people who are specialists in a different aspect of testing or a different aspect of the product. And you say there's no a test manager?
No, at least for now.
Would you like one?
Well, I would say yes, or maybe to be myself as a test manager.
Well, you can put it this way. You may or may not need a manager, but you definitely need a leader. And in fact, if it's a group of 6 people over here and 6 people over here, I would say a great thing to do would be to have 12 leaders. Now, what's a leader? I take my notion of what a leader is, what a technical leader is, from Jerry Weinberg's work. Jerry Weinberg said that a leader is someone who creates an environment in which everyone is empowered to do their best work.
That's a good definition.
And I can tell you right away, just by the fact that you're raising this question, Yulia, that you're a leader. I can tell just because you're.
Thank you.
All right.
Because I'm care.
Right, exactly. So what I would suggest that you do is you're aware of these other people. Seek them out if you're working on a piece of code or a piece of a feature of a product, or if you're working on some aspect of testing. Invite them for a paired testing session. And absolutely, as soon as you can, when all this terrible stuff stops happening, make sure that go up to whoever your actual managers are in the company and make sure that it's on the agenda, because it's not so hard in the UK. Make sure that it's on the agenda that you will meet in person, face to face. And you'll chat about work. And you'll chat about other stuff too, which will humanize you. You'll see each other as people, not just those other people who are somewhere off in the distance.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for great advices. Yeah, hopefully we could do it soon. Yeah, thank you, Michael. Yeah, I didn't think about the like fair.
There's another thing
testing.
Yeah, there's another great thing. Just before the COVIDs, I got a chance to speak in Cardiff. There's a network of testers in Bristol and Cardiff.
Like meetup, like Southwest meetup.
Get together with them. And I forget the name of the organization. There's a woman named Sam.
Yeah, it's a Southwest meetup, testing meetup. Yeah, I know. I'm in this community.
That's wonderful, and that's another way to answer Ekaterina's question, which is to expand your social network that way with local meetups. And if you don't have one running, start one. It's remarkably easy to do it. All it means, or all you have to do, is invite 2 or more people to a pub, and off you go. You've got a meetup.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, thank you for your answers.
Vitaly, you seem to be up next.
Yes, hi Michael, my name is Vitaly and I'm working at Customer Times Corp as lead QA. And my question is, how do you think in today's world it is better for QA to have general knowledge about different testing technologies or to develop narrow expertise? Thank you.
Do you have any coding experience, Vitaly?
Just on basic level.
Okay. Do you know the difference in computer science between an OR and an XOR?
On the basic level also.
Okay. So we have a funny thing in human language where by default, at least in English, if we say cup of coffee or sandwich, there's an implicit thing, there's a choice between one or the other. But in computer science, or means one or the other or both. So what I would do though is so that gets confusing. What I would do is I would replace those things with and. It is very good for you to have specialist knowledge because that will help people who only have generalist knowledge, what Harry Collins might call beer mat knowledge about that subject. You'll be able to help them out. You'll be the specialist. But it's also really important, I think, for a tester to have generalist knowledge as well. And the broader that knowledge, the better, because as we were discussing with Ekaterina, stuff from outside, when you import it into a specialist domain, and every project is a specialist domain in some sense, right? It's you're focused on a particular product at that time. All the good ideas, almost all the good ideas in any community, project is a community in that sense, all the really good and innovative ideas come from outside that community to some degree. For example, in engineering, there's a fellow named James Watt who developed the steam engine. Now, he had a problem because he could not figure out how to keep pressure or keep the steam contained in a vessel at high pressure. But who knew how to do that? People who make beer. They knew how to do that. People who make stills, they knew how to do that. So Watt's big invention, that the steam engine, to a significant degree, depended on the skills and the ideas from people who were making booze of one kind or another. There's an absolutely terrific television series from 1985 or so, I think is the year, called Connections by a fellow named James Burke. And he goes through the history and the social networks associated with about 8 inventions. It's a 10-episode series. The first and the last bracket these 8 inventions that he follows. He traces them from a long time ago. For instance, just recently it fell apart, actually. There was that great big radio telescope that sat in a valley, Arecibo in Puerto Rico. A great big radio telescope, size of an entire valley, covered a valley. Well, he traced that device backwards to the Battle of Hastings in 1066 in Britain. It all started with riders who had stirrups for their horses. And you think to yourself, how on earth can you go from that to that? Well, what he does all along, all the way through the series, is he shows that change and innovation and technology are connected not by some lonely genius sitting upstairs in an attic someplace and saying, aha, I've got it. But it's made, inventions are made because this fella had a problem that he needed to solve, and his niece knew, oh, I can think of a really present example, come to think of it. Why do we have computers today? We have computers because of weavers, because of weaving. People used to make stuff on looms, and then somebody said, can we figure out a way to put patterns into looms and have all that driven by machinery? Well, it turns out that, now I'm not sure which came first, but there was this idea of having punch cards, cards like this with holes in them that were being used. I forget which application was first, whether it was to drive musical instruments or to drive looms, the things that do the weaving. Well, that idea got turned into, oh, we can use those punch cards in order to help us sort and collect data. So I think it was in 1890, a fellow named Herman Hollerith started using those same kinds of punch cards to collect data for the US Census. And then somebody got the idea, hey, we can read those with an optical card reader, right? With with light and a light detector. And that idea went into ways of putting massive amounts of data through computers. So it started with either weavers or organ grinders. And he traces this chain of inventions to the modern day computer. These long chains of innovation come from outside the field that the inventor was working in. And I think we need to pay attention to that phenomenon. That the really good stuff comes from people outside a discipline, the generalists, and people inside a discipline interacting with one another, combining ideas from other fields. So you need both.
Yeah.
Let me also say this just about testing too. Any testing that's based solely on a coder's perspective is going to be focused on code. But most people don't use software because they're using code. They're using software to get a job done. So it's important for testers to be able to live in both worlds, the world of the builder and the world of people who get value from the software. And we, as testers, we've got to transit between those worlds. We've got to immerse ourselves in the builder's world and then estrange ourselves from it. That's an idea that comes from sociology. The sociologist is somebody who goes into a social group, learns about it, and then imparts what he or she has learned to the to another world, to people who are not in that world. So as testers, we need to jump back and forth between those worlds. And there's a bad thing going on in testing right now, it seems to me. And that is that people who manage testing are not giving testers sufficient space, and testers aren't asking for it, to go and live with people who are actually doing the work, to watch what they do, to learn about their domain. Some companies do hire specialists in the world that, some amount of specialists that live in the world that those users live in. But those users are often discouraged. They're treated as subject matter experts, and they don't hang out with the developers. And the developers don't hang out with the subject matter experts. It's our job as testers to be able to go back and forth between those worlds. Now, my friend Oliver Wilson, when I met him in 2008, First time I met him, he had heard a little bit about me. He approached me at the Eurostar conference, and he told me this wonderful story that his company, which worked on an emergency response system, a call center, they were writing software for that. His company sent him to sit beside people in call centers and watch them and listen to them work, and to have lunch with them and to have dinner with them. And of course, it was a little bit tricky because a few things. One is he couldn't interrupt them while they were working. He had to wait for break times to ask them questions, or for when they weren't actually on the phone, but he got to observe them and hang out with them. The other thing is he was listening to the calls himself. And sometimes when you're on an emergency call center, you hear some pretty harrowing, scary stuff that doesn't sound very pleasant. So it could be emotionally challenging. You find yourself in a world where maybe you didn't exactly sign up for that when you went to software engineering school. You didn't realize that maybe you'd be going out with paramedics on emergency calls. But I think it's really important for us as testers to ask for that, to get as close to the world of the end user as we can. I haven't written too much about that yet, but I'd like to.
Thank you. That was very interesting for me and helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. How are we doing? I'm prepared to stay as long as anybody else is. I've noticed that we have 24 people on the call. If there are questions that come up in the chat, we can address those. It's really up to the organizers, and I'd like to thank the organizers, by the way, the people from Commited, Victor and Olga especially, who set this up. I'm very grateful to them for the opportunity to meet you all and to chat with you. Are there any more questions? What are the most important problems in testing? Oh, holy cow. Do you want a list? It's a long list. It's a long list. I think one of the most important problems in testing at the moment is a general reluctance on the part of everybody involved, managers, testers, developers, a reluctance to focus on this crucial fact. Our job as testers is to focus on problems. And that's really challenging because people don't like talking about problems very much. I love talking about problems. I see the world in a way from the perspective of problems. I look at things and I think, oh God, this might be okay, but the problems in it really bother me. And it's not exactly that I'm a perfectionist. I couldn't be a perfectionist. I'm not perfect. I don't know how to be perfect. But I have a natural kind of irritation at things that don't work smoothly. And I think part of our job as testers is to remain professionally irritated, to remain professionally annoyed in a helpful way. It's our job to identify problems before it's too late. And it's our job to bring problems skillfully to the attention of people who matter. And I think in business, we see this general issue where what managers really want is a kind of quality reassurance. They want to know, is everything okay? And to me, that's kind of the wrong question. As a program manager, which I was in the middle 90s, what I wanted to know from testers was an answer to this question. Are there problems that threaten the on-time, successful completion of our work, whatever scale our work is, whether it's a problem in this function or this feature, whether it's a problem in the product overall, whether it's a problem in this one-line change. What I wanted to know from testers was, are there problems that threaten the value of our work? Now, at that company, Commited.tech, which at the time was the maker of what appeared on the bestseller list as the best-selling piece of software in the world. We had 2 or 3 products that vied for that position, and we were regularly on the top of those lists in 1994 and 1995. As program manager, I wanted to know that. I wanted to know, because the programmers would tell me about all this wonderful stuff that they were doing. I wanted to know from the testers, are there problems that I need to know about before I make a decision as a program manager that this product is okay, or whether we're going to have to pull this feature out before we ship, or whether we're going to need to fix some problems, or whether this problem is okay. That's what I needed to know from testers. Are there problems that threaten the value of our work? And so as testers, I believe we've got to be committed to seeking problems, to looking for problems, and not just shallow problems, but deep problems. And that means, there's another issue, that we must learn how to negotiate for time to do that, to defend ourselves a little bit from this firestorm of builds that are coming at us every 15 minutes. And just say, this week, we're going to focus on this build. And if you want to keep those builds coming, that's fine, that's all right. But if you want those builds to be reliable, the programmers are going to have to be focused on checking their own work, reviewing each other's work, and pair programming, and doing automated low-level checks if they want to do that. That will help them to notice easily avoidable problems in the product. I need them to do that because I need time to study one build out of 20 or out of 100 really, really deeply to find the rare and the hidden and the subtle and the intermittent and the emergent problems that could escape the developer's discipline. So we have in rapid software testing, we have a way of looking at that, which we kind of put onto a grid. And I'd like to share that with you just at the moment. The issue is that there's 4 kinds of risk. Put this up on the screen. There's 4 kinds of business risk. The business wants a product of high value, but it wants to keep the cost of development low. There's a bunch of people building the product. There's a bunch of people studying the product to figure out if what we built is what we really want. There's 4 kinds of risks. One is that we might not be clear on what the customers would want the product to do and how to build that product, what we want from that product. We might be committing easy to find avoidable errors as we try to build the product. It might be hard for us to know what to build and how to test it and how to avoid errors and how to identify deep problems in the product. And there might be serious problems that escape even a highly disciplined development process. All right, well, if that's the case, we need to do 4 different kinds of testing. And I'm focused on one of them, and the developers are focused on the other. And somewhere in the middle, we somewhere in these blue areas, we collaborate on this stuff. The shift left people are really interested in this stuff. Design-focused testing and review to help us discover what the customer really wants or how we should build the product. Then there's the discipline frame, in which the developers mostly are doing this kind of work, review and pairing and shallow testing, that is shallow is not an insult. What we mean by shallow testing is testing that's quick and non-disruptive, and that helps us to find easily avoidable errors to help us confirm that what we've just done is reasonably close to what we intended to do. So to look back this way a little bit. But then this frame, the preparation frame or the testability frame, looks back at these things and looks forward at this one. What we're trying to do in the preparation frame is we're trying to make this stuff go well, and then this stuff go efficiently. This stuff here, this kind of testing is the kind of testing that I'm really interested in. And this is to answer your question, what are the big problems in testing right now? Most of the testing world seems to be over-focused on this stuff and not deeply focused enough on this stuff. So that's a big problem, that people are confusing this stuff for everything that testing is all about. But the fact is that, let's see, let's put it this way. Maybe there's a problem here. The problem is that there's too much focus on this, or this, or this, and not enough focus on this. Now, it might look as though this is a timeline or a time loop, but actually this is not just applicable to a whole a sprint or a story or a development cycle. Testing is a fractal, and testing activity and development activity, the testing activity within it is a fractal. So we can apply those questions at every level. Everything we do gets tested end to end, whether that the end-to-end testing that we're talking about is the end-to-end testing of a product, workflows for a product, or maybe it's end-to-end testing for an API call, or maybe it's end-to-end testing for a function. Every piece of work we do has these four things. That's interesting. There used to be a morph transition there that would sort these things into the four tables. I don't know if that ever happened. I guess it didn't. But all of our testing gets put into these four frames, and I don't think we pay quite enough attention to that. Let's see. Joe Fan. How can people find a job where they can adopt rapid software testing principles? Nowadays, most people love the ISTQB. They don't give a damn about you. They think of you like an alien. Well, Joe, if I'm not mistaken, you're in Vietnam. And I know it's hard. I know it's difficult. But right now, the world is providing us with opportunities to do that remote work. And I've got a lot of problems with remote work. But there are a lot of advantages too. And one of them is that it's possible for you to obtain work in other places. How can you show them that RST is better than what they're doing in the interview? One thing you might do is you might bring a portfolio. And here's a suggestion, because I've been doing this. Earlier on in this meetup, I talked about doing work with Mabel, that testing tool that a couple of years ago they said, oh, well, thanks to AI, we're going to be able to do the work that testers will do the work that real testers will do. And so it took me a little while to get around to it, but I decided for a conference talk that I would test some testing tools. And what you've got on the web right now is my report on what I found with Mabel. What I would suggest you do, Joe, is that you develop a portfolio of testing work like that. Bring that portfolio to your interview and show them, here's a product that I tested, and a testing tool is a great thing to do with that, especially if it happens to be the testing tool that they're using. write about your experience with testing it. Write about the bugs that you found in it. And as a process of doing that, write really, really good, useful, helpful bug reports. And notice, by the way, that a bug report is not about expected and actual. A bug report is about the problem that you experience and about providing an example that can get somebody to that, to see that problem. And then an oracle, how you recognize this as a problem, what your means of recognizing the problem was. If you describe that, then you'll be in significantly better shape. Create a portfolio. Show them that you've done excellent testing work, and you can do that on open source products that people have got up on GitHub. You can do it on free software. You can provide, go to LinkedIn. I know that you're on LinkedIn. And what I'd like you, or what I'd suggest that you do is do a catalog of all the things that annoy and frustrate you about LinkedIn as a customer of LinkedIn, and then bring that portfolio with clear, articulate descriptions of the problems that you're experiencing in LinkedIn. Bring that to your interview and say, this is the kind of work I do. And you know what? Not very many people will go for it. That's just a fact. There aren't very many clients out there, as I established earlier, for great testing, but there are some, and you don't have to work for all of them. You only have to work for one. Any advice and tips on writing about testing? Yes, do it, Marat. Get after it, do it, and ask for feedback. Ask for critique. Ask other people to test your testing writing. But write about your experiences. Write about what you've learned. Write about books that have impressed you. Write about what you know. Read Jerry Weinberg's book on the Fieldstone method. What's it called? Weinberg on Writing, that's the name of the book. Another piece of advice I could give you is don't write the way I write, because Jerry one time I wrote a blog post, and it was I was trying to shine light on something that Jerry said, which is the idea that quality is value to some person. And I generalized that. I said that X, any abstract X, is X to some person. And that's something I call the relative rule. And I wrote a blog post about that. In fact, I can provide you with a link to that blog post. It's here. Relative. Yeah, there it is. And Jerry wrote back to me and he said, Michael, I got to tell you one thing. He said, your paragraphing is pure shit. Well, of course, that stung a little bit because I admire Jerry very greatly. And but now when I'm writing, those words are in my head. And so I try to make more breathing space in between my paragraphs. So that's a piece of writing advice. Don't follow my paragraphing style. But my advice would be the first thing to do is do it and solicit feedback and get that feedback. Did I ever get the feeling that I was running after the departing train during my testing career? Tatiana, I'd like, I think, a little bit more context on this. There's one way I could answer it, which is I don't feel like I'm running after a departing train, because I think I honestly believe that the work that I'm doing and the work that James is doing are work that are helping to pull the train. I honestly believe that. I'm not the only one, but I think I'd like to believe that I'm trying to bring the craft along with me. So I'm not running after the departing train. What I do feel, though, is I'm trying to push a big rock uphill because As James says, and it's a wonderful saying, he says that wisdom must be aged like fine wine in oak barrels, where ignorance rains down from the sky on a daily basis. I would love to help defend testers from that ignorance. And there's a lot of it out there, I have to say. So I'm asking for your help in doing that. I'm asking for your help in writing about the craft, in talking about the craft, in advocating for this idea that the reason we're here as testers is to help people find problems before it's too late. How do I deal with my feelings about it? Oh boy, it's really hard some days. Sometimes I get awfully depressed about the terrible, silly things that people are saying about testing. The tool vendors are the worst of it. Today, what did I see today? I think I can show you this on my screen right now. I was looking at an upcoming talk that somebody is doing for one of these testing organizations, and I went to the website of the organization that's sponsoring the talk, that's giving the talk, and they make this claim. Let me put it up on the screen. "90% reduced technology risk." Well, what the hell does that mean? 90% reduced technology risk. That is a meaningless statistic. And I don't know why more testers don't stand up and call bullshit on this. Well, I kind of know why, I suppose, because as Carl Bergstrom says in his book, Calling Bullshit, eliminating bullshit requires an order of magnitude, 10 times more effort than creating it. It takes almost nothing to put this stuff out, but it takes a large number of people to say, this is bullshit. What does 90% reduced technology risk mean? The trouble is, people who don't think very critical about this will say, oh, 90%, that must be pretty good. And then they'll buy this tool and they'll try to achieve 90% technology risk, all while pushing the effort on the testers to get around the problems in this tool. 40% faster project completion. Compared to what? Compared to whose projects? Did they ever go out and study this? Or did they pick one person who said, wow, we got our project out faster because we used your tool and we didn't find any bugs? Right? We didn't have any bugs after we used this tool. Yeah, they shipped the product, and then what happened? 40% project completion. 50,000 hours saved annually. 50,000 of whose hours saved annually? I believe the testing community should rise up, and every time we see something like this, post it and call bullshit on it. That's what I'm going to do a little later today. I think I think there was a reason for me bringing that up. So that's the sort of thing where I get around this feeling by changing my frustration, my defeatist kind of attitude. Those kinds of feelings often creep in. I sometimes get really depressed. And the way I get around it is I engage with other people. I engage with people who inspire me. I work with James. I chat with people like Eugene. I observe people like Joe who have this ambition to get a really good testing job. And I think, oh, wow, if they can help me and if I can help them, maybe we can move this craft forward some. And that's how I get over the feeling. I re-engage with people of a like mind, and I recommit to my desire to help people find problems before it's too late. Merit, is asking a very philosophical question. If informed decisions aren't made, does testing still have meaning? Well, I think if you are providing a service to people and helping them to become aware of problems in the product and they're not doing anything about it, I guess they're not buying what you're selling. And what I would advise is go find a different client. I got a lot of heat one time from a former colleague who said, you can't tell young testers to quit their job and go work somewhere else. And my reply is, yes, I can, because I don't think anybody should be working in a job that's unfulfilling. And I know that it's hard to change jobs, and I know that it's hard to find a good job, but I don't think that we should be doing pointless work. If we find ourselves doing that, it seems to me we've got to move on to somewhere where people are honoring the work that they're doing, valuing the work that we're doing. And if you're in a position like that, use your social network, use your colleagues, use your friends, use your reputation to find work elsewhere, because there are places that value skilled testing. They're out there, but it sometimes takes some work to find it, and I'm not going to diminish that. I had opportunities to work longer term for banks in Canada, but I get more energy and more value for in trying to spread that what I know and what I've learned from working in various places to other people. So that's another option, is to go independent. That takes a lot of work and it requires a lot of support. I'm really lucky to have a wife and a family who support me in that. So there's another piece of advice that's really hard to act on, and that is to be lucky. And if you are lucky, it's important to be grateful. I'm very grateful to that. But there are ways that you can improve your. There's a bug. There's a bug that's flying around. There's a fruit fly in my office here, and it's flying around in front of me, and it's really annoying me. Don't go to testing. Doesn't have meaning in places where people don't make informed decisions. So go elsewhere. Can testing help with discovering values for life? Yes, I think so. I think so, because we are born testers as human beings. We're born testers. If you look at a little kid, little kids are testing stuff all the time. And I think little testers or little kids are actually really skilled testers. And one of the problems that we have in society is we sometimes socialize them into not being skilled testers. Don't play with that. Put that down. You'll hurt yourself. Don't ask why. Just shut up and comply. That's really sad, because that human desire to question things, to discover things, to play with things, to get hurt a little bit sometimes, and to learn from getting hurt. Those are all really, really important parts of testing. Those are the things that help us grow. And you're saying, Marat, your bias towards viewing the world not in bright colors sometimes leads me to nihilism. Well, you got to be careful about that. As a tester, it's important to see the value in things, to see how people can get value from a product that you're testing. And it can be kind of easy to take that kind of approach, to believe that everything sucks. But if we look at the way we're seeing problems in things, not as a nihilistic point of view, to say nothing's any good, but in a way of saying, well, I can see how this could be good. And if we got rid of some of these problems, maybe it could be better. That's a way, I think, towards growing. Okay, Marat, you've got, oh, wow. Have you noticed any repeatedly emerging patterns for modeling risk strategies or seeing other people's work, like attributes, components, capabilities, Whitaker, STPA, system theoretic process analysis, failure mode, effects analysis, as any other? Wow, you read a lot, Marat. That's good for you. You are investigating a lot of different aspects of testing and engineering. that you're expressing some interest in lots of different kinds of models. Yeah, and so patterns become true in some kind of meta sense. Yes, what I would say is when you see a pattern in something or when you see a model, pop up and see if you can generalize that model and then pop back down and look at something closer. If you've not read this book, Marat, I can tell by by looking at the intention in your question that you might get a lot of value out of this book. An Introduction to General Systems Thinking by Jerry Weinberg. And look at the general systems movement. Here's another key text in that. Where is it? Berlanti. There it is. General systems theory. General systems theory. This is a sort of key text in the general systems movement. Donella Meadows, where is she? Yeah. This book, Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows, is more friendly than this book, which in turn is more friendly than this book. But each of these books gave me anyway, an assist in terms of seeing the patterns from modeling risks and strategies that you're describing there. Obviously, if you ask me for a general pattern of strategies, one of my favorites is a heuristic test strategy model, which is here. A little macro, where's, there we go. XHTSM, there we go. That is an instance of a kind of strategy model like the one you're talking about. But yeah, engage in systems thinking, and I would recommend it seems to me like you're way ready for this book if you haven't read it already. An Introduction to General Systems Thinking. It's got a companion book called General Principles of Systems Design. This book is about observing and observers and modeling. And this book in particular is about the idea of aggregation, looking at things in groups and zooming in and zooming out. I hope that's a helpful answer. How are we doing? We're at the 90-minute mark, a little beyond that. Are there any other questions? I'd like to say thank you to Eugenio, who has helpfully put some links in the chat, and I would recommend that you follow those links. They're quite helpful. And let me commit to this. If you have any questions anytime, my email is michael@developsense.com. Well, I'll just type that into the chat. Or you can also find me on Twitter. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm delighted to get questions from people. Mara points out some people also recommended A Pattern Language by Christopher Alexander. You bet. I found it to be a really fun book, a really interesting book. The subtitle is Towns, Buildings, Construction. If we want to talk about patterns in testing, and Kem Kainer assured me, insisted that this is not a patterns book. but I think it is a patterns book. But Kem's the author, so he gets to say what he thinks, but I'm the reader, so I get to say what I think. This book, Lessons Learned in Software Testing, if you haven't read that, I think there are observable, describable patterns in these lessons, and it might be a fun exercise to go through it and identify what some of those things are. But that's a book of the same, a similar kind of nature to the one that you're talking about, Marat. And here's a recommendation that I think a lot of testers would find fun and interesting, and which I thought it was a terrific radio series. And let's see. Yeah, it's a radio series that you can pick it up. I think you can find it as podcasts as well. It's a series from CBC Radio, a guy named David Cayley, called How to Think About Science. 24 parts, and it's interviews with scientists, historians, at least one poet, a juggler, a guy who's an expert on the cod fishery in Newfoundland, a scientist who examines that. There's a lot of social science stuff in it, a lot of stuff on the extents and limits of what science can do, and it's really marvelous. The first episode especially, interview with Simon Schaffer, the fellow that I mentioned earlier on today, who connected me to the work of Harry Collins. Books by Harry Collins. Oh my goodness, there's so many of them. But one is The Golem. Now I'll take the title here. By Harry and Trevor Pinch. And Harry's book, The Shape of Actions. And Eugenio has already put tacit and explicit knowledge in there. And then yet another book, which is Harry's book on the meaning and methods of sociology, called Forms of Life. So just about anything by Harry is money in the bank, and just about anything by Jerry Weinberg is too. Jerry's Quality Software Management series, that one, and this one. Those two books, those are really terrific as well. All right. Well, it seems to me that the well has run dry for a little while. So I would like to thank once again Victor and Olga and the people at Commited for setting this up. I love the opportunity to do this, and I'd like to thank the people, Vitaly, Ekaterina, Yulia, and Vasyl, who asked their questions. Oh, Tim! Hi, Tim. Oh, here. Oh, you raised your hand to say hi, as opposed to ask me a question. See, this is the thing about, oh, you got a question? Oh, you got a question. Okay, ask away. Oh, wait, the question above. Let's see, I missed it somehow. Let's look at the quick chat. Tim Ab, oh, simple, silly question. What would be, based on your practice, what would be better, to continue developing tests based on an old framework and old technology, or start from scratch a new framework and migrate from the old tests? Oh, Lord. Tim, what you've got is a bunch of questions about a product, questions that are 15 years old. What is the chance that those questions are still relevant? 30,000 of them? What are the chances that some of those questions are in fact providing you with the opposite of what you want to know about? What tacit knowledge is required to interpret not just the answer from that question, but the intention of the question? What I would suggest is, of those 30,000 so-called tests, what I would frame them as automated checks myself. And if you haven't read our blog post on that subject, it'd be a really good idea. Whoops, that's wrong. Let me just do that again. There's a heuristic that I'd suggest that you apply, which is never run or perform a check that you don't understand. With one exception, one prominent exception, and that is if your goal is to learn about that check, then it's okay. And then there's another another heuristic that goes along with that, which is never trust a check that you don't understand. What are these things actually checking? You don't know. You don't know. You don't have the capacity, I don't think, to understand 30,000 lines of code, 30,000 bits of code, 30,000 questions. Don't worry about them. My advice would be to ignore them because you can't trust them. You don't know what's in them. So, and while automated checks are a good idea for programmers, I'm really skeptical about how useful automated checks are the closer we get to the human interface. I think automated checks at a low level, at a unit level, at an integration level, at where we're testing components that have checkable interfaces, those can be really good idea. Like in the world of agile talk about testing, there's lots of really bad ideas, but the idea of contract checking, that is where both a customer and a producer of an API provide a list of inputs and outputs that they would anticipate getting from this particular API, from this particular function. That's a kind of cool idea. That's okay. But to say that you've got a bunch of contract checks running on your API does not mean that you've tested the API. It means that you've checked the input, the output against certain kinds of inputs. But to test an API, it seems to me, means to, among other things, to evaluate whether that API call is comprehensible and useful to a programmer who is outside the building context. To look at the documentation for that API and to see if that documentation is useful and clear to a programmer who's going to use it. Whether it contains evocative, real-world kind of examples. Many APIs aren't documented that way when they could be. And that turns into a problem because the developer who's trying to use it won't understand it very well. Very few APIs, it seemed to me, that are tested via contract checks, relatively few of them are tested from the perspective of performance risk, from the perspective of security risk. So I would say that contract checks are a great idea, but let's not mistake that for testing the danged API, which involves many, many more things. And the heuristic test strategy model can help you with that. Thanks, Tim, for that question. I I think it's really important for that lesson to come out. Never run a check that you don't understand unless your goal is to understand that check. And if you don't understand it, never trust it. You can't trust it. If it's returning green, you don't know what it's really checking. And if it's returning red, you can't assume automatically that there's going to be a problem in the product. There could be a problem in the check. So at that point, it becomes okay to run the check and to see what it's trying to tell you. But before that, until you've examined it, until you understand it, you shouldn't trust it. All right. In the current project section, nobody knows what the tests are doing. Okay. let me get upset. If you don't know what the test is doing, it's not a test. It's not a test. It's this isn't science. You know, when a scientist says, "Well, I don't know what my experiment means," it's not an experiment until you've interpreted it. It's not an experiment until it's got some sense of design associated with it. There's a question that you want to examine. Now, there's a quasi-experiments. There's such a thing as a quasi-experiment where we observe some set of data, some set of outcome, and or we set something up and we just kind of see what happens without a very strict, firm hypothesis in mind. That's all right. But without analysis, without looking at what it means, it's not a test. It's not a test. It's just a bunch of code running on some other code. Nobody knows. If nobody knows what it means, you haven't tested it. You haven't tested until you've applied an oracle, a means of recognizing a problem. And if your oracle or oracles don't say to you, aha, problem, that doesn't mean there's no problem there. It just means that none of your oracles has informed you of a problem that might be there. That's always a fundamental uncertainty in testing. There's no oracle and there's no set of oracles that can tell us that a product is problem-free. There are oracles that can alert us to a problem, but no oracle can tell us that everything's okay. Good luck in your quest, young adventurer, Tim. I hope that you are able to impart this, that a bunch of checks that nobody understands, that's useless. There's just no point to it. There's no purpose to it. Yes, you have to change the project then. And that can be really hard for a tester, because there's so many people who are going to tell you, just shut up, just get your work done. But the whole purpose of having checks in a product is to understand something about it. Imagine a building in which we have 30,000 smoke alarms, and we're not sure whether any of them work, and we're not sure whether any of them have drained batteries. And as Jerry Weinberg once put it, unfortunately, one of the ways we usually find out about a broken smoke alarm is there's a fire. So. Boy, Eugenio, you're a demon with this sort of stuff. This is wonderful. Thank you for your help in posting those things. I appreciate that. Any opinions on the recent Facebook disaster? Well, which one? Yesterday, just last night, in fact, fewer than 8 hours ago, I was griping in the Rapid Software Testing Slack forum about this phenomenon that a lot of people are willing to let go, willing to let pass by references to automated testing or to test automation. And my contention is, it is not helpful in the slightest to talk about automated testing or test automation because testing can't be automated. I think it's appropriate and wonderful to talk about testing tools, but as soon as we talk about automated testing, we raise the possibility and we reinforce the possibility in some people's minds that testing can be automated. Checking, output checking can be automated, just like spell checking can be automated, but spell checking doesn't add up to editing. So apropos of that, I ask people to notice, people who are casual about speaking out against the idea of automated testing as a term of art. There's some people who say, we just got to let it go. We just got to call it, let's just call it what everybody else calls it and leave it at that. There's just too much work to change that. My response to that was, yes, it was also too much work for some people to stop referring to Indian workers as coolies until they realized how insulting and racist that was. And it used to be hard for people to think in terms of women as citizens and voters, because that's just too hard. It's too complicated. A citizen's just a citizen. A citizen's somebody who has the vote. Women don't have the vote, so we don't have to think about women as citizens. Well, we've got to change the way we talk about things sometimes so we can change the way we think. And I said, if you want evidence of that, let's look at the companies who have said, oh, we've got rid of our testers and we've automated the testing because we can do that. Who are the companies that are doing that? Google and Facebook. And what that has is very serious social and political consequences, because as soon as you say we're getting rid of the testers and we're delegating it to automation, what we're saying is we're delegating critical thinking, risk analysis, social care and concern. We're delegating that to machinery too. So what is happening systemically in Facebook, because there's two recent Facebook disasters. There's a Facebook outage where people trusted technology to completely get why I'm asking about Facebook. Yeah, it is. There are people who've delegated work to technology and are not keeping human scrutiny on it. But what I see is the Facebook disaster is not the one that happened on the day that Facebook went out for 6 hours. That was bad enough. Lots of people lost money. Lots of people had their businesses shut down for a day because they've depended on Facebook so much. The real Facebook disaster, it seems to me, was that testimony that happened in front of Congress, which says that Facebook is systematically doing things that harm people, and Facebook is aware of it. That goes hand in hand with an organization that says it's getting rid of the testers. How to test appearance of new terms, especially when testers' traits are probably new to new unknowns. They could be biased towards, yeah, new terms are great. Here's how we do it. We test them. And we test them not just with a focus on saying, hey, are they great? We test them with a focus on saying, well, what are the problems in them? James and I are kind of famous for making this distinction, a distinction that I first made in 2009. And I tried to persuade James that this was a good idea. And he said, no, why are you bringing this up? Testing, checking, who cares? It's all the same thing. And it took me about 2 hours conversation to convince him that this was really important. And then he was on board. And there's a record of that in James's blog where he talks about how I convinced him that testing and checking was a good idea. But 3 or 4 years later, we realized that we'd been talking past each other a little bit. And so we had to refine our understanding of it. So what we do with any kind of new term and any kind of new terminology is we propose it, and then we subject it to a test, which is to put it in front of each other, to put it in front of our community, and we argue and we argue and we argue about it, and we refine it, we change it until we think we've got it right. Now, what happens out in the world when James and I publish a new idea, a new term that we've come up with, I'll give you an example in a sec, what they see is a ship in a bottle. They see and this is a metaphor that comes directly from Harry Collins, by the way, they see the end result of many hours of argument that we've had about it. And what they don't see is the mess. They don't see is the raised voices and the shouting. They don't see the argument. They don't see the bad feelings that we sometimes have about these things, because you know what it's like when you get what you think is a really good idea. You get enthusiastic about it and you get bought into it, and then somebody comes along and challenges it. And your immediate reaction is to seize up and to get upset about it because you like your idea. It's my new pet. It's my new toy. And so James says this, and I get disappointed and upset and sometimes frustrated and sometimes angry. Why isn't he seeing this? But that process, that effortful process of trying to get stuff right is at the very essence of what testing is all about. And it's of the essence of what science is all about too. So there are arguments that happen in science all the time about what we're going to name things, because scientists understand that if we name things right, there's a better chance that we'll understand them better. And if we understand things better, there's a better chance that we'll name them right. And I'm cranky about this issue. The reason I'm cranky about it is because if our words are sloppy, then it's easier for our thinking to become sloppy. And if our thinking is sloppy, it's easier for our words to become sloppy. And that can reinforce, that's a self-reinforcing problem. That's a feedback loop. But as George Orwell points out, in Politics in the English Language, the good news is that this process is reversible. We can choose to be sharper about this stuff. We can critique things. Like, here's an example that James came up with not too long ago, DevOps. Now, what is DevOps? Well, the way I heard it described is DevOps is development and the operations people working together to address the needs of the business. And I have to ask myself, and pardon my language, I'm just going to say this, how fucked up did our business have to be before that started looking like a really cool new idea? We must have been in a terrible mess if that wasn't obvious and intrinsic to the work that we do. Okay, well, maybe it wasn't. Just glorified sysadmins, says one comment. Well, I don't want to diminish it because I think it is an important idea. But what James pointed out is it really should be called delivery ops. Right? No, sorry, not delivery ops, devlivery. What it's really focused about is the building and deployment of a product. And that's all right. That's an important thing. But devlivery, the idea that it's about delivery is, I think, the fundamental notion behind it. And that's a good notion. What devlivery helps us to remind us of is that it's focused on delivering stuff. But now I would like to redirect our focus into what are we delivering? What is being delivered? Have we looked at that thing that's being delivered from a critical perspective, not just from the perspective of building it and having checks in the build that give us a sort of first order idea that there's nothing obviously screwy with the build. But just because a product has been subjected to some checks doesn't mean that it's been tested. And Eugenio has just very helpfully put up, for the second time in this chat, he's put up a link to our testing and checking refined post, which is, I realize now it's been up for 8 years. Well, just the other day, we came up with something that James was testing a site, a website that had, it's a website that's a book subscription thing. You sign up for an account with this thing and you get access to something like 2,500 books, and there's a listing of the books. and there's a link to the book from the publisher's website. And there's a description of the book, and there's an author and an author bio. And for some reason, I'm not sure why, all this stuff is being entered by people sitting at a keyboard. I guess it's because there's so many different publishers, and they have so many different ways of getting their stuff that the producer of this service decided that it would be a good idea, and maybe it's a good idea to have human eyes on it as well, to have humans to transcribe that information and put it into this systems database. Well, James started exploring this product because he was judging a testing conference. And as he explored this service, he noticed certain little patterns of problems. Like, for example, the book description and the author description were sometimes identical. This happened a few times. So he put in an automated check to see if the author's bio and the book's description were the same. And you can check that. That's easy to check. He put in checks to see whether there was a 404s associated with the author's picture, or with the actual location of the book out there on the web. And they found a few things like that, and that can be automatically checked as well. But then he noticed another pattern, and when he was looking over it with me, I noticed this, that there were systematic problems in titles of books when there was punctuation in the title. For some reason, there was this sort of pattern of errors where if there was punctuation in the title, the punctuation would be wrong or something would be left out. And he noticed that that happened a little more often when there was punctuation in the title. So what he did was he created a tool that allowed him to scan through very quickly the whole list of books, all 2,500 of them, and highlighted cases in which there was punctuation in the title. And then he went to that particular, to books that had been flagged that way, and looked at those ones. And one every 3 or 4 of them had a problem with it, rather than 1 out of every 10 or 1 out of every 15 books in the listings. So it was a way of directing our attention to a particular class of possible errors. We are going to start calling that automated flagging, where there's no decision rule being applied here that says a probable bug, probably not a bug, but a flag that says, look over here, and have a human look at this particular entry in a database, or this particular class of entries in a database, and see if you can see a problem somewhere near there. It's the idea that there are certain kinds of patterns available that are kind of systemic in the way people make mistakes sometimes. So that actually speaks to Marat's earlier question as well, about general patterns of failure mode analysis. So we can flag things that seem more likely, even if it's not likely, but more likely than other things to have a bug. And when we notice a pattern, we can flag those sorts of things. So that's a helpful new idea that we're going to have to talk about and write about, called automated flagging. All right, folks. It's been a couple of hours, and it's been a joy to be able to get to rabbit on like this. And if there are no more questions, I think I'm going to take a break and finish my sandwich, which I made just a little over 2 hours ago. I've got a couple of bites left. Thank you, Oksana. Thank you for your thank yous. Thank you, Eugenio. Thank you, Marat. Thank you for sticking around. Thank you, Poke.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you.
All the best. Keep in touch. Bye-bye.